Right now, you're probably worried about something that hasn't happened yet. Maybe it's a conversation you need to have, a deadline approaching, or an uncertain decision looming ahead. But here's the question I want you to sit with. Is that worry actually helping you? Or is it just stealing the peace you could be experiencing right now, in this very moment? 2,000 years ago, the Stoic philosophers discovered something that modern psychology is only now catching up to. The primary source of human suffering isn't the future itself, but our anxious thoughts about the future. And they didn't just understand this intellectually. They developed concrete practices to free themselves from this mental trap. Today, we're going to explore exactly how they did it, and more importantly, how you can apply their wisdom to reclaim your peace. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your anxiety lies to you, and you'll have a practical framework for breaking free from the tyranny of imagined future disasters. This isn't wishful thinking or denial. It's a radical reorientation of how you relate to uncertainty itself. Let's start with a brutal observation from Seneca, one of Rome's greatest Stoic philosophers. He wrote, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." Think about that for a moment. He's not saying that difficult future events are miserable. He's saying that the anxiety itself, the mental state of worry, is what makes us miserable right now. This distinction changes everything. Seneca lived during the reign of Nero, a time of genuine political danger and uncertainty. He could have spent his days consumed by worry about what might happen to him. Instead, he discovered something profound. The actual suffering of difficult circumstances is often far less intense than the suffering created by anticipating those circumstances. He wasn't denying reality. He was observing the actual mechanics of how human minds create unnecessary pain. When you're anxious about the future, you're not actually experiencing the problem you're worried about. You're experiencing your thoughts about the problem. And here's what makes this particularly cruel. You're suffering today, right now, for something that may never happen. You're paying an emotional price for a future event that might be completely imaginary. Your mind is like a film projector playing disaster scenarios on the screen of your consciousness. And you're sitting in a theater experiencing all the emotional weight as if those disasters were real. The Stoics understood that anxiety doesn't come from the future itself. It comes from your relationship to uncertainty. The future is, by definition, unknown. But instead of accepting this fundamental fact of existence, we fight it. We try to control the uncontrollable through worry, as if enough mental suffering today could somehow prevent pain tomorrow. Seneca saw this pattern clearly, and he knew there had to be another way. Now let's go deeper. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of history's most influential philosophers, made an observation that cuts right to the heart of why we suffer unnecessarily. He said, "Man is not worried by real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about real problems." This isn't poetic exaggeration. He's describing the actual mechanism of human suffering. Most of what we worry about never happens. And when real problems do occur, we're often more capable of handling them than our anxiety suggested we'd be. Epictetus knew something about real problems. He was enslaved, beaten, and tortured. His leg was deliberately broken by his master. By any measure, he had genuine cause for suffering. Yet he became one of the most peaceful and wise people in history. How? Because he made a distinction that most of us fail to make between what is actually in his control and what isn't. His external circumstances, his slavery, he couldn't control. But his judgments, his responses, his inner freedom, that was entirely up to him. And he discovered that this inner realm was where his real power lay. Let me give you a modern example to show how this works. Imagine you have a job interview scheduled for next week. Your mind immediately starts generating disaster scenarios. You'll freeze up, you'll say something stupid, they'll judge you harshly, you won't get the job, and then you'll spiral into financial instability. You're lying in bed at night, heart racing, playing through these scenarios repeatedly. But here's what's actually real. You have a meeting scheduled. Everything else is imagination. The anxiety you're experiencing right now is entirely based on imagined problems, not actual ones. The fascinating part? On the day of the interview, you might be nervous. That's natural. But the intensity of that nervousness is likely far less than the anxiety you experienced days beforehand. Why? Because you're dealing with the actual present moment, not the imagined future catastrophe your mind created. And second, you're usually more capable of handling the real situation than your worry suggested. You prepared. You're intelligent. You're adaptable. When the real moment arrives, you often discover that reality is more manageable than the mental catastrophe you constructed. This is what Epictetus meant. We're not actually worried about real problems. We're tortured by our imagined versions of them. The gap between what we imagine and what actually happens is where all our unnecessary suffering lies. The Stoics saw that if we could learn to recognize this gap, to pause and ask ourselves, is this real right now? Or am I imagining it? We could reclaim enormous amounts of mental energy and peace. This is not positive thinking or denial. This is clear-eyed realism about the difference between imagination and reality. Now we arrive at the most practical question. How do we actually stop this? How do we break the habit of suffering about imagined futures? Seneca gives us the key with another deceptively simple statement. He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary. In other words, when you're anxious about something that hasn't happened yet, you're choosing to suffer twice. Once in imagination, and then again if the feared event actually occurs. The Stoic solution is to suffer only once, when and if the actual problem appears. The first practical step is awareness. For the next week, I want you to notice when you're anxious. Don't judge it, just observe it. Notice how your mind is living in a future that doesn't exist yet. Notice the actual sensations in your body. The tightness in your chest, the racing thoughts, the tension. Now ask yourself, is this problem happening right now, in this present moment? Almost always, the answer will be no. Your present moment is usually fine. Your body is safe. You're breathing. You're alive. The problem is entirely mental and temporal. It's in your mind, and it's about a future time that hasn't arrived. The second step is to redirect your attention. This is where the Stoics were brilliant. They didn't teach you to suppress worry or pretend it doesn't exist. Instead, they taught you to deliberately shift your focus to what is actually happening now. If you're anxious about an upcoming presentation, stop rehearsing the disaster in your mind. Instead, direct your attention fully to what you're doing in this present moment. If you're eating, taste the food completely. If you're walking, feel your feet on the ground. If you're working, focus entirely on the task in front of you. This isn't distraction or escapism. It's the recognition that the only moment where you actually have power is now. The third step is to practice what the Stoics called negative visualization, but doing it correctly. Once a week, spend 10 minutes imagining something you're worried about actually happening. Not to make yourself more anxious, but to do something profound. Imagine that it happens, and you handle it. You survive it. You discover that you're more resilient than you thought. You find that life continues. This isn't morbid, it's actually liberating. Because when you realize that you could handle even your worst-case scenario, the teeth of worry lose their power. You're no longer terrified of the unknown. You've mentally rehearsed it, and you've discovered you could endure it. Finally, practice this mantra whenever anxiety arises. Is this happening right now? If the answer is no, then you have permission to stop suffering about it. You can prepare if preparation is possible. You can plan if planning will help. But you cannot change what hasn't happened yet through worry. The only thing worry accomplishes is stealing your peace today. The Stoics would call this recognizing what is within your control, your actions, your preparations, your responses, and releasing what isn't. The future, other people's reactions, external events. Focus your mental energy where it actually has power. Here's a specific exercise you can do today. Think of something you're worried about. Write down exactly what you're anxious about. Be specific. Then ask yourself, when will this actually happen? What will I actually need to do when it happens? What can I do right now to prepare? Do that one thing. Then let it go. Not through force or self-discipline, but through the recognition that you've done what's in your power and the rest is not your responsibility. This is how the Stoics lived. Not with heads in the sand, but with eyes clear and focused on what they could actually control. The Stoic philosophers weren't naive optimists who believed nothing bad would ever happen. They lived in a harsh world, often facing genuine danger and loss. But they discovered something that transformed their relationship with suffering. That most of our pain comes not from what actually happens, but from our anxious imagination about what might happen. They learned to distinguish between the future and the present moment, between imagination and reality, and between what they could control and what they couldn't. If this resonated with you, if you felt something shift while watching this, I invite you to subscribe for weekly Stoic wisdom. We'll continue exploring how these ancient practices can transform your modern life, freeing you from anxiety, clarifying your values, and helping you build a mind that's unshakable. The Stoics have been dead for 2 millennia, but their insights are more relevant today than ever, in a world of infinite distractions and uncertainty. Join our community of people who are choosing clarity over worry, presence over panic. Your peace isn't dependent on the future being perfect or predictable. Your peace comes from your relationship to uncertainty itself. And that relationship, that's entirely within your control, starting right now.